This is Ask an Expat with Marcus and Matt from an Expats Russia, where we answer your questions about what it's like to live, work, and travel in Russia. Hey everyone, in this video we're going to discuss whether bribes are problems for expats in Russia. Matt, what do you think?
I would say generally, no, they're not a problem. Although we'll get into a lot of the details here because there's obviously a lot of misconceptions about bribes in Russia. I don't want to give the impression that there are no bribes in Russia, but I also don't want to give the impression that everyday life is riddled with bribes in Russia, because that's absolutely not true. In my a little over 5 years in Russia, I never actually encountered a real opportunity to give a bribe. I've been in maybe a couple situations where if I had taken it a little bit further or had spoken Russian from the beginning, that it might have happened more often. But almost any time that I was in a situation where a bribe situation could arise, say for example getting pulled over, I got pulled over a number of times, but usually if you just speak English, they'll just let you go because they're not gonna ask for a bribe from a foreigner. Well, they might if you're speaking Russian, right? So the problem is that I think bribes 15, 20 years ago were a big problem in Russia. That's a fact, right? But in the last 5 to 10 years, most of the bribes and the low level of society have they're not there. They're not obstacles. I will say the people still bribe for things, right? So like if you're going to have a baby in a smaller Russian city and you want to have the room to yourself, I guarantee you can give a bribe to the doctor to make sure that you get that. Or if you're studying university at some of the lesser known universities in Russia, you can absolutely bribe the teachers to get a diploma. Those things are still there, but it's not like a mandatory part of life, if that makes sense. Would you agree with that?
So going back to the original question, yeah, I agree with that in general, but going back to the original question about whether it's a problem for expats, I would say, again, no, like you said, because typically in order to get into that type of situation, you do need to speak Russian, and the majority of expats don't speak Russian to that level. But there are situations where I've known, they kind of, it seems like, whether it's a government, a police officer or whatever, they kind of, first of all, they never say, give me money and I'll let you go. We can solve this right now. They never say that. I've been in probably 4 situations, I can count on one hand, when it was obvious that they wanted a bribe, but they never said it. And, I spent over 10 years in Russia. So I would say that it's gotten a lot better over the last, my first time in Russia was 2005. The last time I was there in 2019. So it's gotten a lot better, and I haven't seen a ton of it myself, but from Russians specifically, I hear about it quite often, and that's kind of like, from their perspective, it's part of Russian life. It's like these, gatekeepers or whatever you want to call them, they kind of put you in this difficult situation, and they don't offer solutions except, well, what do you want to do about it?
Right.
And you're like, well, the first time I was in that situation, I was like, I had no idea what they were trying to do until, I was like, it kind of light bulb went off in my head, and I asked the police officer who stopped me, what do you, na что вы намекаете, right? What are you implying or something?
Yeah.
And they're like, no, nothing. So again, over 10 years in Russia, 3 or 4 times I've been in that situation, but I wouldn't say that it's anything that anybody would admit openly, right?
Right. Well, so I have been in numerous encounters in Ukraine, actually, and the police would come up and just say, you're being too loud on the street. We have to go to the police station. But then he'd say or you can just give me X number of hryvnia.
No.
The ball is always in your court in terms of bribes. I honestly don't think you'd ever be directly asked for a bribe in Russia. And I think that's probably quite smart on the part of the police officers or people who are potentially willing to take one, because no matter what you think, if you give a bribe or take a bribe, both people are committing a crime at the end of the day. Under Russian law, absolutely. And one thing I would like to say about bribes in Russia is if you're coming from the United States or the UK, a lot of times, well, for US citizens for sure, US law applies to your behavior abroad. So if you give a bribe in Russia, you can be, prosecuted in the United States for the exact same act, even though you weren't in the United States. So you shouldn't be doing that in any case. But I don't know. Like I said in the beginning, I never had any real situations where I had to deal with bribes, except for one at the.
Well, do you know any other expats who had similar situations, or who said, yeah, I think I've heard one or two stories from an expat who said, yeah, I just paid him.
Yeah, sure, I've heard that. Sure.
Get out of the situation, but majority of cases, it's kind of out of the realm of your expat experience because of the language barrier.
Right.
And
I had 2 experiences in 5 years where a bribe was almost implied. So one, I got on a train and I was going to cross the Russian border into Estonia. I got to the border and it was like this special zone, and the guy was asking me all kinds of questions, and he basically inferred that, we could solve this quickly or we could solve this over a long period of time. And I chose the long period of time route because I had an inkling of what he was hinting at. And the other time was I had my dog, and they were just telling me that the papers were wrong to take the dog back to the United States, even though we had the right paperwork. So, and he took 40 minutes looking through all of our documents over and over, and he just kept saying, I don't know what we're going to do to solve this. This is a big problem. This is outside my jurisdiction. And, they just try to, waste your time enough that you kind of come to a breaking point. But again, in 5 years, I will say actually the time at the airport with the dog was after I had left Russia. We were just going back to visit. So, I have no real anecdotal evidence that, bribes are a common problem for expats. And as you said, offhand, maybe I can think of 1 or 2 people who have said they've really encountered a problem with bribes over 5 years in Russia. it's just not.
Right. One thing that you did mention, and I'll end with these 2 points. So I was a professor at I taught English at a university, and it came to the point where I was giving exams, and students would show up the last day, and I was like, well, I've never even, what's your name? I'm looking over the roll call sheet or whatever, and I'm like, I've never seen you before. You show up and you want me to give you a good grade, and then later I got a call from my superior telling me what grades to put down for which students. She kind of, and I just pretended that I had no idea what was going on.
Right.
I was like, but they never came to class. And so that was probably, one of the situations where, one of the very few situations that I was like, what? It's true. Russians told me about this, and it's actually, but again, it's hard to even track because I had no evidence. It was just a phone call, and then I said, this student didn't come to class, and she's like, well, what about this student? I was like, no, he doesn't come either. And she's like, okay, well, let me enter the grades. And I said, no, I'll enter the grades. Don't worry. She's like, okay. And she didn't really know how to finish that conversation because I was like, no, I'm going to do it. But, and then the second thing I just wanted to end with was kind of the takeaway for expats in Russia is that after all, what we've covered is really, you won't really need to worry about it because you probably won't be in a lot of those situations. But if you are in that situation where, somebody's trying to drag it out so long that, you're like, oh, I'd rather just kind of slap down a 500 ruble note or 1,000 ruble note to get out of this situation, I'd say, don't do that. Just keep being patient and make it look like you're not in a hurry, and they'll probably give up before you. In most cases, especially if you didn't do anything wrong.
Right. Well,
so you just,
I think that's a
drag it out as long as you can.
That's an important point, because if you did actually do something wrong, it's very hard to, get there.
Yeah.
Run their patience out.
Don't do anything wrong, but secondly,
I was never targeted at all for any sort of potential bribe or we see this foreigner guy, let's see if we can get him for something. That never happened, not once. It always arose simply in a situation where there was ambiguity, maybe something went wrong, getting pulled over, right? I don't know 100% sure. Maybe you crossed, the double white line and you didn't see it, one of these kind of smaller but very strict laws in Russia. So anyway.
Right. Well, there was one situation, for example, I was stopped, asked for my registration. I showed them my registration. They say, it says Город, and it should say Moskva, but it says Moskovskaya Oblast. And I pointed to him and I said, Oblast, Moskovskaya Oblast. Like, I corrected him because he was trying to like tell me it's wrong, but it was actually correct. So there are little situations where they're like, I'm gonna try and see this, foreigner who doesn't speak Russian or whatever, trying to get him like, this is wrong. If I hadn't known better in that situation, I would think he's telling me because in America you say that's authority, right? They're telling you the truth. So that's kind of a really big cultural difference in Russia.
Yeah, I agree.
So if you had any encounters with these types of situations with bribes, what have you heard about bribes in Russia? Comment in the comment section below, and we'll see you in the next video.